Okay, picture this. It's 63 BC, and the Roman Republic is an absolute powder keg. We're talking decades of corruption, mind-boggling inequality, and political violence that has pushed the entire system right to the very edge. And right in the middle of all this chaos, a plot is brewing, a plot that threatens to burn the city of Rome to the ground. This is the story of the Catilinarian Conspiracy.
These words, right here, kicked off one of the most dramatic showdowns in Roman history. The man speaking is the consul, Marcus Tullius Cicero. He's the highest elected official in the Republic, and he is pointing his finger right in front of the entire Senate at another senator, a man named Catiline, accusing him of treason. I mean, the stakes just could not have been any higher.
And that sets up the big question we're tackling today. The official story, the one told by the government, paints this picture of a monstrous terror plot. But there's another version, a version that suggests this was actually a desperate uprising by people who were just being crushed by an unjust system. So, let's look at the evidence for both sides, and you can be the jury.
First up, let's examine the case for the prosecution. This is the version presented by the state's star witness and, really, its chief investigator, Consul Marcus Tullius Cicero himself. For him, this was about as clear-cut as it gets, a simple case of good versus evil.
So who was this guy, Lucius Sergius Catilina? Well, he was a patrician, an aristocrat from an old, fancy family, but he was totally broke. And after he lost the election for consul, he started campaigning on this single, absolutely explosive idea, tabulae novae, which means a clean slate. He was promising the complete and total cancellation of all debts. Now you can imagine this idea electrified the poor, but it absolutely terrified Rome's wealthy elite. They saw it as a plan to just destroy the economy and, of course, their power along with it.
And Cicero was just as dismissive of Catiline's followers. He didn't see some popular movement, no, he saw a rogues gallery, a total mess. He painted them as this coalition of the desperate and the degenerate. You had wealthy landowners drowning in debt, disgruntled war veterans who'd blown all their money, and then, just common criminals and assassins. In Cicero's telling, these people were all united by one thing, greed, and a desire to watch the Republic burn.
But is that really the whole story? I mean, is it ever? The historian Sallust, who actually lived through all of this, he argued that Cicero was missing the bigger picture entirely. He believed the real problem wasn't just one guy, Catiline, but the rotten state of the Republic itself.
This quote from Sallust just nails his point. He traces all this rot back to an earlier dictator, Sulla, whose violent purges had basically broken Rome's moral compass. Sallust argues that Sulla created this whole culture of greed and cruelty, where might makes right was the only rule. So in this view, Catiline wasn't the disease, he was just a symptom of a society that was already deeply, deeply sick. And hey, we don't just have to take Sallust's word for it. This quote comes directly from a letter sent to the Senate by Manlius, who was Catiline's top commander out in the field. He frames the rebellion not as some greedy grab for power, but as a desperate fight for freedom, and he's specific, freedom from the violence of moneylenders who are just crushing the poor with debt.
And Catiline himself said pretty much the same thing. In his own letter, he claimed he was the victim of a smear campaign by his powerful enemies and that he was simply taking up the official cause of the wretched. So in his own telling, he's a champion for the oppressed, not the monster Cicero was making him out to be.
Okay, so we have two completely different stories, right? On one hand, Cicero has these really strong suspicions and plenty of accusations, but he's missing hard, undeniable proof. Well, that all changed when the conspirators still inside Rome made a fatal mistake, handing Cicero the smoking gun he so desperately needed.
So here's how it all unraveled. First, the Senate, fearing the absolute worst, gave Cicero emergency powers with a special decree. With this new authority, Cicero's network of spies got to work. And the big break came when the plotters in Rome reached out to envoys from a Gallic tribe, the Allobroges, asking for military support. This was a huge mistake. The Gauls, seeing a much better deal with the government, immediately turned informant. This allowed Cicero to set a trap and intercept incriminating letters that were signed and sealed by the lead conspirators. It was game over. Faced with this undeniable proof, the plotters in the city confessed everything.
So, with the plotters in custody and their guilt confirmed, Cicero faced a brand new crisis. What on earth do you do with them? And this wasn't just a simple question of punishment. No, this was a question that would test the very foundations of Roman law and the Republic itself. The debate that followed in the Senate was absolutely intense. On one side, you had this rising political star named Julius Caesar. He argued for life imprisonment, and he warned everyone that to execute Roman citizens without a proper trial was flat out illegal and would set a really dangerous precedent. But on the other side was Cato the Younger, a famously rigid conservative. He demanded immediate execution. He argued that the state was fighting for its very life, and that it couldn't afford to waste time on legal niceties.
In the end, the Senate chose security over the rule of law. They voted with Cato, and that very night the 5 conspirators were taken to a prison and strangled to death. Just like that, the plot inside the city was over. Catiline himself, hearing the news, would later die fighting bravely at the head of his rebel army in one final doomed battle.
So now that we've seen all the evidence, let's circle back to our central question. How big of a threat was the Catilinarian conspiracy really to the Roman Republic?
This really sums up the two competing views, doesn't it? For Cicero, the threat was external and pretty straightforward. You had a monstrous villain leading an army of degenerates to destroy the state. Simple. But for the historian Sallust, the real threat was internal, the deep moral and economic rot that had been festering in the Republic for years. In his view, Catiline wasn't the cause of the problem at all. He was just a symptom of it.
And that leaves us with one final lingering question. Cicero is hailed as Patra Patria, the father of his country, for saving the Republic. But to save it, he broke one of its most fundamental laws, the right of a citizen to a trial. So what was the greater long-term threat here? Was it an army of rebels out in the hills? Or was it a government that decided it had to kill its own laws in order to save itself?